and gentlemen, welcome to the Prince Podcast here on podcastjuice.net. My name is Michael Dean, and joining me today, we have another special guest. Every guest is special, but this is a very, very special guest. We're joined today by the lovely Gayle Chapman. How are you, Gayle?
I'm great, thanks. How are you?
I'm doing excellent, and we are so happy for you to be on the show today. And before we get started, I got to introduce the rest of my round table of friends here. We have Mr. Big Sexy and Saxer. How are you?
I'm doing great. Looking forward to later tonight, where I will be dining at my very first Michelin star restaurant.
All right.
Yes.
Woohoo!
We're moving up. We went from Big Macs to Michelin. Just joking.
That's funny.
Also, we have Mr. Ant Pooh on the line. Sir, how are you?
I'm doing great. Pleasure to be back on the show.
All right. Thanks for coming on. And certainly last but not least, we have the lovely Kanisa on the line. How are you?
Hello. I'm very excited to talk to Miss Gayle today.
All right. So let's get into things. And also, before I go any further, I have to give my respects and shout out to a gentleman who helped this thing get together here, Gregory Bell. Shout out to you, sir. Got me in touch with Gayle, so I really appreciate that. So before we get started here, let's go all the way back. Gayle Chapman, she was the original, or one of the original keyboardists in, I don't even know if it was called the Revolution at that time, and Gayle can help us out with that, but the original band that Prince had when he went on his solo deal, Gayle Chapman was in the group. A lot of times you don't, and this is from me, my ignorance, you don't hear as much about you, Gayle, sometimes as I think people should. So hopefully this will be another avenue, as many others, where we can, hear your story and hear from you about your times with Prince and beyond and all that good stuff. So again, welcome to the show. Can you tell us?
Thank you.
Yeah, you're certainly welcome. Can you tell the listeners and me, what years were you with Prince?
1978 to 1980.
Thank you.
And I was taking a nap one pleasant afternoon, wondering if I would ever play in any band that I really wanted to, and the phone rang. And this was 3 months after I had auditioned for the band with Prince. And he called me, and he said, "Hello, Gayle, this is Prince. What are you doing?" And I said, "Well, I'm taking a nap, but I'm awake now. What can I do for you?" He said, "Can you come to practice? We're starting in an hour. Can you make it?" And I said, "Yeah." So I hopped out of bed, put my clothes on, put my junk in my car, and headed out the door. And made it in under an hour when it was typically a 90-minute drive from where I was. So that was the beginning of that.
Now, back it up a little bit. When did you first hear of Prince? And I'm assuming that you lived in the general area of Minneapolis. Is that correct as well?
I did. I lived in Minneapolis. I was living in Bloomington. When I got the call, I had recently moved out there. When I first heard of Prince, I was living in North Minneapolis on Pennsylvania Avenue in a little house that I share rented with some other person. I lived upstairs, they lived downstairs, but we shared the living room downstairs and the kitchen. So I was listening, I used to jam with Charles Smith. He's known as Chazz, and that is Prince's cousin. I didn't know he was Prince's cousin at the time. All I knew was that Chazz was this friendly guy who knew a bunch of other friends, and he liked to drum. So we would jam in the living room. I had my keyboards set up, and we would play some music. And one day, after he'd gone, I had the Prince album on, For You, and had it cranked up really, really loud, extremely loud, as a matter of fact. And I was really digging the music, and suddenly, through all this loudness, this voice kind of came down from the ceiling and through my head and back out the other side. And it was very quiet, but it was so loud. You know what I'm saying? It said, in order for Prince to tour, he's going to need a band. Then I turned down the music and I looked around and I said, hello? Somebody here?
Wow.
And there was nobody there, but after that, I got on the phone with Charles and I said, Charles, I need to talk to you about Prince. What do you know about him? He says, well, he's my cousin. I said, really? Does he need a band? He says, well, he's doing auditions now. And I said, oh, how come you didn't tell me? And he said, because I thought you were already in a band. At that point, I just laughed and I said, so what? I want to audition. And he said, okay. So that's how that got started. And I went and I auditioned, and then 3 months later, I got the call.
Wow. So you were working with Chazz, unbeknownst to he was related to Prince.
Yes, that's correct.
So going back to the Prince album that you had, I mean, was that a big deal? I mean, what did you know of Prince? What sparked you to buy that album? Was he a big thing in the hometown, or did you just really like the music? I'm just very curious.
I actually didn't buy the album. It was loaned to me by some other friends. And they said, you need to check this kid out. We know him, and he's a good guy, and he's really talented, and you might like his music because you're pretty funky. And I said, oh, cool. So I listened to it. I started to listen to that album, For You, and that was his first album when they had albums, you know.
Right. Okay. Now, just to go back into your history in terms of music, I mean, what was some of your musical influences? Because you said somebody said you was funky, so I'm curious, like, what were you into at the time?
I used to listen to George Duke and Frank Zappa and 10 Wheel Drive. I'm a child of the 60s, and, you know, Janis Joplin. What was it? It was a horn player. It comes from a big family full of horn players. Ronnie Laws. I loved Ronnie Laws. Yeah. Okay. And Stanley Clarke.
Going back to that first album, you did the audition. Take us to the audition. What was that audition like with Prince?
Well, the audition was lots of fun. It was in his house, his house that he owned on or rented anyway on France Avenue. I can't remember if he owned it or rented it. Nice little place. Had a basement and an upstairs. And I remember walking in, seeing all these people sitting on the couch waiting for their turn. And I was the only one dressed in a headscarf and a blue jean tent dress, wearing flip-flops. That's how I showed up for this. I called myself the Granola Queen because I pretty much was. But I was playing really funky music, and I loved what Prince did. And they were doing the audition downstairs in the basement, and let's see, Andre was there, and Bobby Z was there. So they were already in Prince's band, and then I was the third member brought into the band, into his first touring band. I was not the first female keyboard player that he'd had. In fact, I didn't know that until Greg Bell actually informed me and sent me photos. It was Andre's sister that was actually the very first. So, and I was the second, but I was the first lady of keyboards in his first touring band.
Wow. Okay. And well, were you the first? You guys actually did a show. In terms of.
Yeah. Yes, I was the first one hired that did shows with the band in its first format with Des Dickerson, Matt Fink, and Andre Simone and Bobby Z. Okay. And then there was me and Prince. I was the only female in the band. And that, you'll just have to ask me questions about that. That was fun too.
Oh, we're gonna get into. I'm curious. Just going back to that first show at the Capri, right? Like, what do you remember from that?
Yes, in fact, I got to tell you this. I'm gonna. There's a guy from L.A. named Morris Mills who is a big Prince fan, and
yes,
he is doing a concert in April 20th at the Capri, and I'm going to make a cameo, step on stage and do a couple numbers, so that'll be fun.
Yeah, shout out to Morris. I talked to him, and I did see that you're going to be at that show, so that's excellent. Yeah. Touring
with Prince was a blast. The first show, he had asked us at one of the rehearsals what we could cover the original tunes that we wanted to contribute, and I had written an instrumental on my clavinet. I had a Hohner D6 clavinet, one of my favorite instruments in the whole world, and he thought it was really great, so we performed it on stage at the Capri. We also had, I think Andre had one called "Thrill You, Kill You" that was also on there, and I've always liked that song. It was ridiculously funny and campy. Des had a tune called "Disco Away," which I thought was pretty funny too. But all really great tunes. And let's see, my mom showed up at that show. She came down to Minneapolis from Duluth, where I grew up, and just to see the show. And I thought that was pretty cool. So it was a great night. It was a packed house, and I don't remember much else than that, but it was really thrilling. It was great for Prince, it was great for the band, and it was a great first step out.
What were remember what sort of Prince's reactions or thoughts were in terms to letting you guys know in terms of the performance of that first show?
Ask me that again.
So, like, coming off of that show, was there like a, I don't know, more of a desire to, well, we got to let's rehearse some more, or, you know what I mean? Like, was there any feedback from Prince to the rest of the musicians in the band to, you know, what's the next step for us?
I can't speak specifically to that answer, but I do know that we were all pumped. And it was one of those stepping stones that got us out to L.A. and helped us prepare for things like the Midnight Special and American Bandstand and other recorded things that went on to Twiggy and Soul Train and shows like that. Okay. So,
well, you mentioned American Bandstand as a classic performance. You know, Dick Clark. You know, I don't know if some of the younger listeners may not understand the magnitude of Dick Clark and American Bandstand, but back in the day, I mean, that was one of the shows, right? Like, when you got on that, you was on some next level stuff. And I remember yeah, go ahead.
That was a huge deal.
Yeah.
That was a huge deal, but Prince was bound and determined to have it done his way. And his way he did. And I don't know how many times you've watched it or ever seen it, but he told us all not to smile and not to speak. And we just did what he said. So when we got on, when he started interviewing him, and Prince did his shy act and, you know, using fingers to tell him how many years he'd been doing one thing or the other. None of us really understood any of that. We just kind of went along with it. But when Dick Clark asked me, who's the lovely lady, I couldn't help but crack a smile because I was so happy to be there.
Wow. And what did you guys think of that afterwards, though?
That was cool. And I can't, and I swear I racked my brain trying to think what any of us did after that performance. But I don't know. I mean, it could have been anything as mundane as heading to the restroom or going back to the hotel to eat. I don't know.
All right.
I wish I could remember.
Big Sexy, man, I want you to jump in here as well.
Yeah, definitely. Gayle, you mentioned your time on the Midnight Special. Now, I remember, again, our younger listeners aren't going to know what that is. I remember it very well back in, mid to late 70s. How did that all come about? Was it like a one-night break in the tour, or did you guys make a special trip to go do that?
I think all of those were done in one trip down to L.A. They were set up so that we did American Bandstand, and we did Midnight Special, and had several other things that were then distributed to other programs from those locations at the same time. Don't quote me on that, but I think that's how that was done, because we had agents and management and tour managers even then that would take care of all of that. So all we had to do was our little artist selves was hop on the plane, make sure we, were fed and dressed and ready for what we had to do. So that was something that gets set up, and then we just did it. I believe it was all in the same trip.
Can you talk about your experience as the only female member of the band, especially as you guys were, what that was like and the different audiences that you had on that tour?
I almost got that. Let me see if I understood you. The tour, you better ask me again.
I think it was being the female person of the band. Would you say, Kanisa, what did she feel like being on the tour?
Yeah, like as the only female, what was that like to be on tour with all these guys and the different places that you went in the South and just around the country?
It was, thank you for that question. I get asked that infrequently, but it's significant when you're the only girl in an all-guy band, in that, especially when you're young, we were all between the ages of 18 and 22 when this whole thing started. And tensions and emotions sometimes would run high, and disagreements would come up regarding why Gayle should have her own hotel room or not. And my answer would always be, well, if you guys can give up 45 minutes in the bathroom when I have to do hair and makeup, or if I'm not feeling well because I have my period, or if you guys can understand that stuff, that's great. I'd be willing to share a room with any of you. Just don't put dirty socks on my bed. Don't, So it was like, okay, Gayle can have her own room in the hotel, but, sometimes the guys wanted their own solace and didn't like, when somebody would snore or something or talk in their sleep. I don't know. But, yeah, there was that kind of stuff. Sometimes it was lonely because the guys had their girlfriends. They would hang out with each other. I don't remember having much interpersonal relationships with any of them except for Matt. and Matt and I would talk occasionally. But it was a great experience.
All right, so Gayle, here's a question I wanted to really jump into, because I was always fascinated. There's these pictures of you and Prince on stage, and I want to know. I want to know. There's remind me which song or where this happens in the show, but you and Prince engage in full on. We used to call it French kissing. Like, how did that come up in rehearsals? To like, yo, Gayle, I want to. Can you remember? I know you remember that. How did that come up? I'm just very curious.
Oh wow. Prince, as you know, had invented sex at that time in his life, and he had a lot of things that he wanted to present as a musician and an artist, and one of those was the more overtly heterosexual side of who he was and what he did, and I didn't seem to have any problems with kissing a superstar on stage. In fact, it's probably more of a claim to fame than anything, Yes, I made out with Prince on stage. Woohoo! Do I remember what it was like? No, unfortunately. I don't. It was a long time.
Was this?
But
was it? Did you guys have to like rehearse that? Because I'm sure he didn't just spring it on you the day of the show or something. Like, did y'all practice that during the show?
No, it wasn't something. It wasn't something that was not planned, but the band, the guys did not like it, and I don't know why.
Yep.
Yeah, I don't know why, but maybe guys can answer that, because I have no clue.
It's called player hating, Gayle.
Player hating, is that what that is?
That's what that is. Yes.
Yes.
The superstar gets the chick.
Yes.
Pretty much.
Okay.
I think Prince had a saying. In one of his movies, his characters had a saying. And I am joking here. Y'all can handle the money, but leave the draws to me. Not saying that that's what. So you have to be very careful with these jokes in 2018. So, excuse me if it goes too far. Sorry.
Mr. Prince is unfortunately not with us, and I think if he were here today, he would find just as much humor in what you said, because he was a pretty funny guy. And even though as he aged, he mellowed a lot, he particularly liked beautiful women, and I don't know if I qualified as that, but I know that as part of the act, it made a huge impression, and the black and white aspect of that on stage caused a huge fervor among black women and gay men to have him making out with me on stage.
Speak on that for a second, Gayle. Speak. What do you mean?
What do I mean? Well, it was the first time I experienced race. I guess you'd call it racial something or other. I don't know what the word would be to clearly define it, but when we would do that on stage, black girls would say, "Get away from him, bitch." They would get pissed. Yeah, they would. I more than once I heard epitaphs from the audience, and usually female voices. So it was interesting. But it didn't stop him, and he had many, many gorgeous women and promoted and had his girlfriends, and, he was very heterosexual. And he was very respectful, but he was also Prince and a superstar. So
And you
he
said
could do
gay
things
men
that other
would be.
people couldn't.
You said gay men would be upset as well.
Yes, because gay men at the time, back in the beginning, you remember when Controversy came out, and the one line in it was, "Am I straight or gay?" Right?
Mm-hmm.
He loved playing on that kind of questioning stuff. I don't know what to call it, but it was part of, I think, part of his sense of humor, as well as part of building who he was. Yeah, you can guess, but my actions will speak louder than my words, kind of thing. You know what I'm saying?
Definitely. I wanted to ask you, what was the do you remember, like, what was the predominantly makeup of the audience? Because you mentioned black women. I mean, was there a lot of black people in that audience to see you guys back in those days?
There was. White people really weren't all that interested. I mean, we were opening for the big tour that we first had was with Rick James. Mm-hmm. And we had Lenny White was the opening act. We were the special guest, and then Rick James was the headliner. So, yes, it was a primarily black audience. And there are a few white hipsters in the crowd. And so I think, no, I never thought anything of it until I was actually out there doing that, how that affected a watching and listening audience. I didn't have any clue, and it was my first eye-opening experience to that.
Mm. Were there things that were suggested, sort of in rehearsal or to you that you didn't do, but it probably were like really out there, or even you might have been like,
There was one, and it turned into a huge media debacle. To this day, people say, you wouldn't sing Head because it went against your religious views. And I'm like, oh, get over that. I mean, how many of you to this day want to, sing about giving head unless you're in porn?
I'll let you tell it.
Right? I mean, okay, I can see Stormy Daniels singing that. But
hilarious.
And let's talk about Donald Trump.
Here we go. Q?
Where is it?
But yeah, so that was just some of that stuff that when the question was, was there stuff I was asked to do? That would probably be the one thing that caused the biggest stir, was my not wanting to. I asked him, I said, can we change the words just a little? And he said, no, we're not changing the words. It's my song, and that's what I want to do. And I said, okay, whatever. So that was pretty much the end of that. I mean, he found somebody else to do it. And I think that happened near the end of my days with him. And people, because it was so close to when I actually left the band, people like to associate that with why I left, but that's not why I left.
Well, okay.
And when you're ready for that answer, I'll tell you that too.
Well, go ahead. You just set it up.
It's really not what people think.
Yeah, you just set it up. So go ahead and tell us.
Go ahead and tell you. I left because I needed more growth in my own life. I needed I needed more than just what we were doing in the band as his bandmates. It wasn't enough to keep me interested at the time, and I was pretty short-sighted in retrospect because I had no idea where it was all going. I really didn't, and I don't think any of us did. The other ones hung in, and right after I left was when You know, they went to Japan, and they opened for the Rolling Stones and had that horrendous audience response. I felt bad for them. I heard about that, and I went, oh, my God. I really felt for them. But I did get to catch up with them when they came to New York City and played at the Radio City Music Hall. And I got to go backstage and say hello to Prince and Morris Day and all those guys. And that was the last time I really ever saw any of them until I would go back and visit my mom in Minneapolis occasionally. And it was then that I would talk to Matt. The other one, I guess Andre was already off to California somewhere by the time I started talking to Matt. And but there are other questions to be asked, I'm certain.
Certain. Well, I wanted to jump into something you just said. We'll come back to leaving stuff, but you mentioned Morris Day, and I saw something you said online about Morris. I just think it's interesting. I think you said at that show, Morris had opened for Prince, or the Time had opened, and it seemed like you were amazed at Morris's growth from the time you must have originally known him to where he's on stage. Can you speak to that a little bit?
I can. Morris was a very shy, light-skinned, freckled black man, and a real cutie and a great, great drummer. And I had no idea when I met him that Prince would be able to draw that kind of showmanship out of him. I didn't know Morris that well, but I was impressed with what they had been able to accomplish together as friends, because they were very close. And I had a lot of respect for both of them, but I thought it was pretty cool. I mean, it was just so surprising to me to see how he had developed in his showmanship ability, and how he had gone from this complete shy, not talk very much kind of guy to this out dancing rhythm machine on stage. He was great.
Nice. Now, going back to, wanting to leave the group because you didn't feel it was fulfilling enough, was that in terms of artistic things or other things in your life?
I think it had a great deal to do with, I wanted more out of my ability to do things on stage than just being the keyboard player and singing backup. Because I've always been, I started out in opera, and I've had lots of education and training and performance. And over the years, I've continued to perform and do stuff. And I was probably a little more anxious than I should have been. But I was young. I was 21 to 23 years old when I worked with him. And had my own dreams, and I guess I had a right to pursue them. I just didn't know and didn't think it through very well, so what was going to happen with Prince.
What was that I'm going to go right to you after this one. What was that conversation with Prince like, to let him know that you wanted out of the band?
Well, we were both living on Lake Minnetonka at the time, and we lived about a mile away from each other. He was on Orono Bay right down the road in a rented house where he had a recording studio. And I got up one day and I just knew I was gonna give notice. And I thought about it, and I called him up one morning and I said, "Can I come over? I have to talk to you." And he said, "Okay." So we talked for about an hour, I think, in his living room, and we talked about stuff, and I told him, I said, look, you've got a lot going for you. I don't think you'll have any problem finding anybody to take my place. I said, I think if I'm going to quit, it's going to be now, because it's going to be better for you as far as timing to find somebody. Then he was able to find Lisa fairly quickly, so that worked well. And he, I don't think he was happy about it, but he accepted it.
Gayle, from a keyboard standpoint, a musician standpoint, I'm familiar with what it's like when you have two guitarists in a band, and one plays rhythm lead. When you have two keyboard players, how does the music, for lack of a better word, get divided among the two of you?
For this particular band setup, I think it was a pretty obvious one. My abilities lay mostly at the time in the rhythm category, and Matt was really genius at putting stuff together with his mini moog and playing really fast leads. And I was never really good at playing really fast leads back then without making some real clunkers. So I did a lot of the horn parts on the Oberheim 4-voice and a poly moog, and played a lot of the chording. And more fancy, intricate, fast licks and flashier stuff and bends. You know what I mean?
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
All right.
So, does that answer that question? That's about all I could say about that. I mean, we both worked together well, and Fritz, I think, really enjoyed having those two distinct capabilities between us, because he knew he could always count on us for what he was asking us to do.
All right. Let me ask some of these questions that we have from some of our listeners on Patreon. I think I did send some of these to you. I want to start with this one from Chris Stepton, if I'm saying his name right. It says, having been there in the formative years of Prince's artistry, did his superstar success shock you? And he also says, and do you think his desire to do it his way, despite what it did to his commercial success, was an early trait in his personality?
He wanted to do it his way, and he always fought for doing it his way. If somebody told him no, he would go around him and find the way to get it done and prove the other parties wrong. And he was quite successful at that. A case in point was when he wrote "slave" on the side of his cheek and changed his name to a symbol. I knew right away what he had done, and I thought it was genius because they couldn't own him anymore. With regard to the first part of the question, ask the first part of the question again. I want to make sure I got it right.
So having been there in his formative years, did Prince's later superstar success shock you?
Does it shock me? No, not at all. He just had a great personality. He was very funny. He had a very dry sense of humor, and he was very straightforward about things that he wanted, things that he liked, things that he didn't like, and made it quite clear what he wanted to do to everybody involved. So it was never a question, and there was nothing shocking about anything that he did. Except for one thing that I noticed, that was the buttless pants. Long after I was gone. That I found funny because it's like, okay, what are you representing here? I mean, you're either teasing gay men or you're just showing off your ass to the world, or both.
Wow. All right.
So anyway, I mean, I'm just human. I'm just a human being. You know, I have the same questions some of the other folks do. Yeah, what's the next question?
Yeah, so here's another one. There's a few of these that sort of ask the same question, so I'm just kind of paraphrase here. But shout out to Roberta Lane, and Chris again. They're asking about in terms of when you left, and was it? And I remember reading these in books, and so I don't know how much is true. But in terms of your religion practices or being a Christian, you know, I guess people wanted to ask, was that conflicting with, you know, the music and the performances that you were doing? And then if you could explain to me, because I'm ignorant to this, but what is this thing called the Way? Can you give me some insight into that as well?
The Way was a biblical research and teaching and outreach ministry that some people called a cult and some people didn't. But one of the things I always wanted to learn was something about the Bible, because I hated getting in religious arguments and not knowing what the hell I was talking about. So I have another knock on the door here, so can we pause for just a second?
Yes. I think that's
okay.
Joe witnesses.
Oh, here you go.
All right, so we were talking about you talked about the Way a little bit, and then the question was, you know, was there any sort of, you know, tension or apprehensiveness, you know, with Christian, and then, you know, performing some of these songs, which probably you wouldn't be able to perform in a church, but.
Well, it's not like I was going to church when I was on the road. No, I knew exactly what I was doing, and I knew exactly how I felt about it. And I'll just tell you, quite honestly, I loved what I was doing with Prince. When you have a job, you have a job to do. Your boss is the one that determines what that work consists of. Did I leave because of that? No, I left because I had other things I wanted to grow up in. And part of it was my own musical ability. Because sometimes people think that, I this must be this fantastic musician to work with somebody like that. And for the most part, I think they're right. People that are working with superstars are, you know, have a fair amount of talent and ability themselves. And as we age and we keep up with it, we get and we stay good, or we become good and we get better. But it takes that consistent practice like anybody else, because I don't think anybody's a born genius or a born artist or anything else. I think it takes work. And Prince, if he were alive today, would say absolutely. If I hadn't stuck my neck out and done some of the things that I did, and fought for what I wanted, and nobody would know me. And I think that's probably a good assessment. But yeah, my religion, first of all, I don't really believe in religion. I do believe in spirituality. I do believe in a lot of things a lot of people believe in. But I don't think, I mean, if religion had that much to do, this is my opinion, if religion had that much to do with what anybody did for a living, most people would run their own companies and never work for a corporation. Because there's so much that people, that corporations or companies profess that others disagree with, either on biblical matters or religious matters. Do you know what I'm saying?
I dig it.
And that's just my opinion. So it's a futile argument that I don't think ends up going anywhere. So, but
Well, yeah, I just wanted to see if you could, sort of really shed some light on that, because you hear all these things, but we never really got to hear you really kind of break it down. So I'm glad that you were able to, express that.
I try. I try. And God bless people for asking questions, because the more people ask, the more I get to think about certain things. And deep down inside, I really loved the guy. I loved what we were doing. I loved the band. And I still do. It's a positive memory in my world.
Is there a...
I may not ever...
I'm sorry?
I may not ever get to go back and do that again, but I am going to be part of the Prince celebration for the first time.
That's what I was about to ask you.
40 years. That's fun.
Yeah, I was going to ask you, was there any sort of, have you come to Paisley Park? Have you been to Paisley Park before?
Never.
Oh, wow.
Never. Yeah, they finally called me and said, we'd like you to join us for the early years panel. And I said, I'm not sure how much I remember, but I'm happy to come and be a part of it. So please,
Excellent.
Yeah. So
I will see you out there for sure.
Are you coming?
Oh, yes, I'm going to be there. Kanisa will be there as well.
Yes, I will be there. Hey, Gayle, I have a question for you about the Rebels. Can you talk a little bit more about that project?
Sure. What would you like to know specifically, or shall I just talk about what I remember?
I was actually listening to If I Could Love You Tonight the other day, and I was like, hey, let's go. Can you just talk about that song or how that came together?
Well, let's see. We were in Colorado at, I forget the name of the place. It was something like Blue Sky Recording or something. I can't remember. It was not far from where Michael Jackson recorded a lot of his stuff. And this was the first recording of that particular song, If I Love You Tonight. And I remember starting to sing it, and Prince was in the control room with the engineer, and I had the headphones on, and the music stops, and he says, cry, Gayle, cry. I said, cry? He says, yeah, cry. Cry when you're singing this song. I said, okay. It's really hard to do, Prince. Crying and singing and not, they really don't. Okay. It's like I had learned semi not to argue with Prince by then. And he said, just cry and sing the song. I said, okay. So I tried to cry and sing the song, and for years I could not listen to myself singing it because I just hated it. But I loved the song. I just didn't like what I sounded like on it. But he thought it was great, and at least that's what he said. Or at least he had this understated way of paying compliments. If he said something like, okay, we're good, that meant he was happy with it. So the other side to that, because he was coaching me through what he wanted emotionally in that song. The guys were upstairs in a room with a big glass picture window, and they were watching and listening to the process while I was in the studio trying to record this song. And at one moment, I looked up, and this was how the camaraderie was in the band. I looked up, and there were 4 pressed hands against the window with big fat red eyes. And I had to stop, and I took the headphones off, and I simply couldn't sing for about 5 minutes because I was laughing too hard.
Wow.
Nobody seemed to get that. You know what pressed hands with red eye are?
They went over our heads, Gayle.
I'm going to say I don't know. Yeah.
Okay, pressed hands with red eye. That means they mooned me up against
Lord.
the window. Trash can resume. That's what that is.
Wow.
Now you know.
Oh, hey, we appreciate you sharing that. That's going in the books right there. Going back to the Rebels project there, why did that not come out? Did you know why you guys didn't move forward with that, or did you guys work any more on those songs other than in Colorado?
That was Prince's decision, and if he wasn't forthcoming with an answer, we didn't have one. That's all I know on that. He may have told Matt or Des. That might be a good question that they can answer, because I certainly don't know the answer to that.
Okay. Another question we have here that I also want to know myself is, after you left the band, what was the next thing for you, music-wise? What did you get into?
Well, I moved to New York City and rented a railroad apartment, which basically means it's a skinny apartment. It's long, and each room is a different room, like living room, kitchen, bedroom, that kind of thing. And I thought I would try my hand out there, and that was more difficult than it seemed, because, you know, I tell people I was working with Prince, and I don't work with him anymore, and they go, "Who?" I go, "Prince." And I never heard of him. And so that wasn't much help back then. But I did get to meet some great musicians, and I had to get a job as a secretary for a corporation, and I worked my way up from being the cleaning lady to being the executive secretary to the president of the corporation. So that was interesting. Yeah, wow is right. That's a whole nother life and a whole nother story.
But and you were still doing music?
Can talk over lunch. Huh?
Were you still doing music though during this time?
Not as much as I wanted. No.
Okay.
I wanted to, but again, a lot of playing music in different places is the one thing I wasn't prepared for, because I was young and had been spoiled working in Prince's band, was when you're on your own, you're starting from the bottom and renegotiating your relationships with people, because you have to meet people, and you have to meet people with influence. And New York City, with 10 million people in it, is a very difficult place to do that. So,
wow. Let me ask you this, and we'll wrap things up with this one. So, can you, like, there's always new musicians and new people that want to do art and different things of that nature. But what can you share with them based off of your experiences, working with Prince early on and then going your own route? And I love what you mentioned how you started from the bottom. You went cleaning lady to the executive, secretary, and then what you're doing now in terms of the real estate things. What can you tell a person that wants to get into art? Like, what's some of the things they should be looking out and how they should move? You know what I'm saying? Making decisions and things of that nature.
Well, the more help somebody has, the better. I guess one way to state that is, don't think of yourself as an island. Life is about relationships. And when you're working on developing yourself as an artist, it's very easy to fall into that trap of being myopic and you only focus on one thing. But like developing your artistic ability and who you are as an artist. And then suddenly you realize you have to promote yourself. So it's the relationships that we develop along the way with people that allow us to succeed with what we want to do. It's just not feasible, in my mind, for anybody to do everything by themselves and really be as successful as they want to. Had I had some things to mull over, I would have done a few things differently. Before moving to New York, I would have reached out to people. We didn't have the internet then, like we do now, and so I would have probably had to make phone calls, cold calls, like any salesperson, and write letters. But there's so much you can do now with today's media advantage and social media and things like Patreon and Reverb Nation. There's all kinds of things you can use to develop yourself, and if you don't have time to do that, you get somebody to help you who cares about you and likes what you're doing. There's just no point in trying to do it all by yourself.
All right. Well, some words of wisdom from Gayle.
Yeah.
We love it. Love it.
Yeah.
Well, listen.
But consistency.
Okay.
The final thing I would say is you have to remain consistent in your work ethic. There are things that successful people do that are routines on a daily basis, and it's those things, some of those things that you do on a routine daily basis are what contribute to your success down the line. So consistency is a big key.
All right, that's what's up. Gayle, also, what was or what is your favorite Prince album, if that's not a hard question?
I'd say that's a hard question because I hate to admit it, as much as I love the guy, I didn't follow him because I didn't have time. I was busy working, trying to make a living.
I respect that. Purse first, money first.
Purse first. I like that.
All right. So, Gayle, you are going to be at Celebration 2018, right?
Yeah.
And you also have, you're going to be making an appearance at the Capri Theater with Morris Mills.
Yes.
During his show. And what day is that? I think the 20th? April 20th, I think?
April 20th, yeah.
Okay. All right. So we're definitely going to be checking you out there. And I know the listeners are going to be looking forward to that as well. Where can people find you online, Gayle?
Facebook. I have a Facebook account. If they want to listen to my music, they can go to www.reverbnation.com. I don't have any of it for sale there, but they can certainly listen to it. You can buy the Gayle Chapman CD that came out in 2003. I think I'm overdue. They came out in 2003. You can buy it off iTunes. And, yeah.
All right. Well, we'll look out for it. Yeah, for sure. We're gonna get it. And we're looking forward to, helping you any way that we can. Again, this platform here is, to make sure that everybody that was there from the beginning to the end is never forgotten. You know what I'm saying? So everyone contributed something. And, like I said, we appreciate you coming on here and sharing your stories.
I am so grateful to have the opportunity. Thank you so much. I've thoroughly enjoyed it, and I hope to talk to you all again sometime. And I look forward to meeting any of you that are coming to Minneapolis. That'll be fun.
All right. We're looking forward to that. Ladies and gentlemen, again, you've listened to the Prince podcast here on Podcast Juice. If you haven't already, please consider joining our Patreon page. Help support the show. Show your love to all of our Patreon people. Thank you so much for helping us do what we do. And like I always say, work it like a job. We'll see you next time.
Just love me and I give you my name. Hey, hey. Don't care. I wanna be there. She just said that I'll be there. That's right. Happy to be there. And put my bed in early and she had to choose. Hair salon or curly, I couldn't lose. I better be there. Looking for a lover, got to come on. She's a queen, give him a throne. Yeah, you already know.